Good day, everyone. Welcome to the third session of our course for this week. I am Alfie Arcelo, and for this session, I will be sharing to you some valuable tips on how to transition from online distance learning to blended learning. We have two learning outcomes for this topic, and they are to, first, redefine the roles of teachers in blended learning from online distance learning, and second, to unravel the useful tips for us to consider in transition to online distance learning. Our presentation is divided into two parts. We start with a quick review of the meaning of limited face-to-face learning before we begin with redefining the roles of teachers in blended learning. It is an essential thing to do before unraveling the useful tips for us to consider in transitioning to online distance learning. As a quick check on what was previously discussed, let's define limited face-to-face delivery using these scenarios. Is it letter A, teacher schedules equal time for online contact and face-to-face contact since all students agree to face-to-face contact? Letter B, the teacher schedules more time for online learning to cater to non-face-to-face students over face-to-face learning. Or letter C, wherein the teacher schedules purely online contact with the students since no one from the class agrees to go face-to-face. What is your answer? Whatever your answer is actually correct. All three are correct, depending on the student's agreement to face-to-face contact. We have to take into account and emphasize that they have the option to be part of the face-to-face group or not. We cannot force them to do face-to-face learning. What we have above is the meaning of limited face-to-face classes. We have to take into account that not all higher ed students are imposed to do it. In fact, only selected courses and programs are granted such after a rigorous inspection, and as mentioned earlier, it is a student's option to participate in face-to-face classes or not. With this mandate being implemented this year, and with the increase in number of people being vaccinated, there is a possibility of an increase in the number of programs that will be granted limited face-to-face. Having painstakingly but successfully adopted to ODL and being comfortable with it now, what if you had to do limited face-to-face classes? So the big question is, how do we transition from online distance learning to blended learning? Now, this is the third time that we have to check on a role as teachers. For so long, we play the role of being traditional teachers. Then we had to quickly redefine ourselves for online distance learning and redefine ourselves again for blended learning. Good enough that ODL and blended learning utilize the student-centered approach, wherein we, the teachers, perform a critical part in encouraging deep learning. As what we have learned in ODL, the role is evolving, particularly in blended learning environments. We have learned before that we are not just transmitters of knowledge, but we are more in ODL and much more in blended learning, because this time we have to consider online and face-to-face modes of learning. So What are our roles this time? We only have three, but these are heavy roles of three. We are researchers and developers, integrators, and guides. If you look at these three, they are the same sets of roles in online distance learning. Let's have a checklist with ODL. They might be the same sets of responsibilities, but let us be reminded that we are now adding face-to-face approaches. So adjustments should also be made to accommodate that. As researcher and developer, we now have to create new approaches or instructional design that would fit blended learning, personalized learning experiences for students in which the face-to-face part could be a good venue for that since we only have limited number of students. So we should take note on how to include that in our new instructional design. Then we test and combine non-traditional and digital instructional methods, some of which might fail, but by this time, we should be comfortable enough with technology and be flexible and have a backup, much more of backup later. We are risk takers as researchers and developers, that we actually pilot successes and failures. Most importantly, we should be able to recognize and record the strengths, weaknesses, limitations, and appropriateness of which technology tools to use for blended learning. Let us go to our second role, and that is being the integrator. In here, we have to take into consideration existing as well as emerging instructional content and approaches to have a more expansive focus on determining best fit instructional methods and meshing online and face-to-face activities. Deeper content expertise is required of us, which means that we are not only up to date with new content in our field, but should also consider the technologies that's relevant even with our old content because we are improvers. With that said, there is focus on differentiating student learning pathways. As a teacher of the new technology for teaching and learning, this has been emphasized in TTL2, wherein lessons in technology are different per specialization. Like for language majors, their technology should be focused on communication and presentation, while the science and math majors should deal with technology for lessons on problem solving and analysis. Lastly, as integrator, we have to be dynamic in sharing what we know to our colleagues. Remember, you are not a certified improver or integrator if others are not moving forward with you. As a guide, what is expected of us? We are open-minded to utilize instructional approaches created by others while differentiating and adapting real time. Yes, when there are better learning approaches than ours, we should not enforce our own. Then, as a facilitator, there is increased focus on facilitating student learning rather than delivering knowledge. We could be content coach and tutor, more of a consultant, and most importantly, there is that huge responsibility in choosing and adapting appropriate and differentiated student learning pathways. We could do that by managing a class where students have the freedom to work on different activities in accordance with their specialization in higher education, as well as according to the group of learners in basic education, without putting aside the learning outcomes of the lesson. With blended learning being more fluid, its implementation presents an opportunity to think about our roles as teachers as a continuum with these three distinct responsibilities. All in all, we have to condition ourselves with our roles for blended learning.